Ephedra is a plant that has been used in Chinese medicine for thousands of years. Also known as waugh, this nondescript shrub is used for alertness, for respiratory issues, for cold and flu symptoms, you name it. But about 140 years ago, ephedra's legacy began to change, and it has now become one of the most complex drug families in our history, medically, historically, and culturally: amphetamines. Amphetamine use is pretty common in our country. According to the 2017 survey on drug use, 1.3 million people reported using it, and that obviously doesn't count people who didn't report it. Some people use it for alertness, some people use it to stay awake, and some people use it to get high. A lot of people using street-based amphetamines are also dealing with a lot of mental health complications and addiction. So to understand our current society's use of amphetamines, we need to go back in history. We need to go back to the beginning and its ties to World War II. We need to go to the explosion of use among common people in the 50s and 60s, and we need to go to the 1970s, the laws that were passed, and how those impact us today. So let's start at the beginning. Amphetamines were synthesized twice in the 1800s by a Japanese and Romanian chemist, but didn't see any use until 1929, when another chemist named Roger Ailes discovered amphetamines and was looking for something to cure his runny nose. He injected 50 milligrams of amphetamines into himself. His runny nose was gone, and he also experienced an improved mood, feelings of well-being, was really talkative at a dinner party that night, and then couldn't sleep all night and felt bad the next day. But he saw some use and wanted to patent this as some kind of wonder drug if he could just get rid of those side effects. So he, in 1932, received a patent and partnered with a company called SmithKline & French. He marketed it as an inhaler to get rid of sinus problems, and they marketed it as an antidepressant. And it began to see the uses of those two things in the 1930s and 40s. Also around this time, people began to open the inhalers, take out the cotton inside, and either suck on it or inject it, which is the first known use of abuse of the medication. In the 1940s, it was used in war, and in Japan, it was actually synthesized as crystal methamphetamine, which you know today, and was given to soldiers who would stay awake for days and days and days on end. So this kind of would continue as an antidepressant and so on in the 1940s. But then in the 50s, amphetamines began to be marketed for everything. It was known as the rainbow of pills. You would walk into a clinic, they would give you amphetamines and a rainbow of pills to help you deal with the side effects. It was used for everything: alertness, not to sleep, to stay focused, and also as a diet pill especially. It was given to women after having babies so that they could lose weight and look better for their husbands. It was marketed as this all over the country. According to a study done in 2008 by Nicholas Rasmussen, in 1945, 5 million people were prescribed amphetamines. In 10 years, that number had doubled. And by 1960, 3% of every prescription in the country was for amphetamines. Things started to change in the late 60s when people started to have really bad side effects, and it couldn't just be seen as coincidental anymore. When people were going to psychosis, it started to eventually be blamed on something. A woman named Susanna McBee, doing an expose for Life magazine, walked into clinic after clinic after clinic and was given handfuls of pills everywhere she went, almost with no explanation at all sometimes. She, in her expose, blew the lid off of the industry, and in 1969, things really started to change. In 1972, the FDA passed the Controlled Substances Act, which made amphetamines a Schedule II substance, which made them a lot harder to get. With this, and with magazines now totally just saying how bad amphetamines were, the cultural zeitgeist began to change. And in the late 70s and early 80s, amphetamine use was actually almost non-existent in the country. But the cultural zeitgeist was about to change again, and in the late 80s, things really started to get weird. So in the late 1980s, ADD exploded as a diagnosis and became really well known as something that kids were dealing with, and prescriptions started to really increase again. At the same time, pseudoephedrine began to be known more widely by common people to be something that could be turned into amphetamines, and the street trade began to really boom. In the late 1980s and 90s, crystal methamphetamine was created really commonly and was really easy to make in people's houses, and clandestine laboratories were popping up all over the country. According to the Smithsonian, illicit amphetamine use doubled from 1983 to 1988, doubled again from 1988 to 1992, and then quintupled from 1992 to 1996. Amphetamines was once again all over and has continued that trend, unfortunately, and can only continue to rise, only continue to get stronger, only continue to impact people more. Now we are within an epidemic that continues to harm the most at risk: homeless people, people of color, and queer and trans people. Laws in 2005 made it more difficult to get amphetamines, but that, or made it more difficult to get the over-the-counter ingredients to make amphetamines, but that does not take into account the drug trade in the US and Mexico. In fact, Mexico is the primary place where this drug has begun to come from in the last 10 years. There is no medication to curb addiction for amphetamines as there is for opiates. Treatment can be impossible for people in rural areas, and for people living on the streets, stimulants can be really hard to avoid. However, if we continue to fight this, then we together can come together with this knowledge and hold pharmaceutical companies accountable and support our communities with the best of our abilities. Thank you.